Welcome to Country acknowledges our First Peoples, the custodians who continue their stewardship across our vast lands. We invite you to be our guests and make a true connection.
Ya welcome ya, Iorokan.
Aminjika.
Yapalina.
Yumbro.
Nanga.
Kapmon.
Yandane Godada Goda.
Welcome to Kupari Wara Country, guys. You're now in Kuyu Beach or Kuyu. Come on down.
Womanjika.
Chingiwala.
Welcome, guys. My name's Dustin Maloney.
All called to welcome yous.
Natma. Welcome.
Yalada Jangura. Garida. Kupari Wara Bubu. Kuyu.
Koji Eagle.
Natamwa Woman Indie.
Hi everyone, I'm Rhoda Roberts. I'm a Wradjuri woman and I sit as a board member on Welcome to Country. I'm so delighted that you've joined us. We've got a series of conversations with some incredible First Nations peoples from across our vast lands. And now we're going to be talking to Joe Williams. And it's just wonderful to have him as part of this conversation. Many of you, particularly if you love football, will know of his football career, but this man does so much more than just play footy. So let me introduce you. Joe Williams, thanks for joining us on this discussion on Welcome to Country. Hey, Joe.
Thanks, Andy Rhoda. It's always a pleasure to sit and chat, whether it be in person or virtually, if we've been doing it for many years.
Oh, it's amazing. I just want people to know, I guess, how extraordinary most of our mob are and how multi-skilled they are. So I want to go right back. But first, I'm a Wradjuri woman. We have such extraordinary country. We belong to the Bundjalung territories. But I know you're from a different part of the country. So would you just like to tell our listeners what country means to you, where your country is, and just a bit about the landscape that you live on?
Yeah, I'm a Wradjuri Wogalu man, and I was born in Cowra, but my family originate from, close to the snowy mountains around the Brungle area, which is near Tumut, on my father's side, then my mother's side from Orange. So Wradjuri on mum's side, and dad Wogalu Wradjuri as well. So down in the cold country, I guess, but been a country boy my entire life. Grew up just with like many Aboriginal boys, the dream to play rugby league at the top level, and I was lucky and fortunate enough to have a few years doing that. And whilst my lifetime, I guess, looks like a life of sport, it's I think I haven't really found my feet until post sporting career, if I'm honest, and the different directions that I'm on now. So. Super grateful for a 15-year sports career as a rugby league player and then as a professional boxer as well. But the work that I do now is probably what I would consider hugely important, and I think more important than playing sport. For me, I was born and raised in Cowra, so a lot of and my dad and family from Brungle were actually they moved to Cowra. When my dad was a young fella and sort of bounced back and forth from Cowra to Brungle. But it's important because I don't know a stack load about those old stories. So, and any chance and every chance that I get, I sit down with my nan, and I'm super thankful that my nan's still with us, to be able to have those conversations, because it's for us young people, it's super important to be able to get those stories, because so many of us lost it, and I think the generation under my nan, so my dad's generation, it's a painful era to talk about, So it's important to know, and I guess share with you as well that I'm continuously learning as a strong Aboriginal man, but but limited in the actual depth in knowledges that I have, and which is, it can be seen as a negative, but I can also flip that and see it as a positive for me, that it's a massive opportunity for me to be able to grow as a person, as an individual, but then be able to share, with my young people. I went to a show, and it was a drama / dance / audiovisual show, multimedia show, recently with Auntie Kerry and Raymond Johnson, which was out at Warringezda, which as you know through the arts, quite well over a number of years, and they did a show, showcased a show out at the Warringezda mission site. And we talked about, they talked about, the different stories and the time at Warringezda, which again, a lot of my family and a lot of our relations were in and around that area from, Griffith, Narrandera, Warringezda, which then to go over to Young, cherry picking, through to Brungle, through Cowra, all that, that trade route as such.
And was there a big mission there?
There was at Warringezda, at Warringezda Mission. And this is the actual site where that show was. And I looked at that show that night and I went, wow, this show has to showcase all around Australia. It was beautiful, right? But the important thing I took out of that is that they were singing and dancing about this old man that used to talk to the magpies. And in our language, they say, Danyana Garu, which means, come here, magpie, come here. And one of the old aunties, Auntie Bronwyn and Penrith, she said, they're talking about your grandfather there. And sat down and it was my great uncle, grandfather, Wilfred Johnson. They talked about him talking to the magpies, and then the magpie would bring a bottle top back, and then he danced with the magpie. And whilst that's the important part of the story, I then rang my dad afterwards and said, oh, Dad, they're singing a song and doing a dance about great uncle Wilfred Johnson. And he goes, oh, what, the story about the magpie and dancing with the magpie? And I'm like, Dad, why haven't you told me this stuff? And he's like, oh, it's just those things that, slip your mind. Or so it's it's a beautiful way to heal through conversation. But again, to learn as young people. As I said, I've always known and always been staunchly proud of being an Aboriginal man, but I didn't know a great deal about the history of my people, because we were pushed and put on missions and taken away and removed. And so my story is very similar to a lot of other people's story, but I'm super thankful that we were still connected. And just hearing stories again over the last few days of them old people, it just makes me super proud of who I am, but the history of who I am, and I think we don't talk enough about the resilience of our old people.
Our communities our language groups, our clans were often rounded up, placed on missions with other groups and clans that they should never been associating with. So often there was wrong skin on these missions. It was a really hard life. They often received rations.
The dispossession that you spoke about, and being rounded up and put on missions, and being segregated away from people and placed with different clan systems, and which would have brought about a stack load of spiritual destruction, in the different energies clashing and so forth as well. You look at that and you can understand why there is a great deal of destruction with a lot of places and people and who we are and what we've become. I do believe that we are on a path to reclaiming that, as you were talking about the reclamation of who we are as Aboriginal people. When we have a look at, again, generational people, it's probably in our grandparents' era where it's conditioned a little bit to not step outside the box, whilst they're extremely, and being, super respectful in how I say this, being extremely resilient people. It's also a little conditioned around the days of the government man and the days of the strict missionaries and even the Christian missions and so forth like that as well, which did displace a hell of a lot of who we are as spiritual people when we're talking about the ceremonial rite of passage and those type of things, not just who we are with their identity and languages and dance and story. So we've navigated our way to that now. And me as a man who is now strong enough to stand as a man in front of people, I was a boy trapped in a man's body for a long time. That was because, you know, what a lot of people don't realize is that whilst we had those rite of passage places, and I'm very delicate of what I say and how I say it, it was also about not becoming of age as a man. It was also about responsibility of who we are and the way our behavior should be when we go back to community, right? So I spoke to a staunch elder that I'm extremely close with, and I said, have young boys always been destructive like this? You know, like they get to a certain age and, you know, puberty hits and all sorts of, you know, the mind and the body starts to wander. And he was like, of course they did. Our boys were always like this, but that's when the old people were smart. That's when they got them out of that's when they got them out of community. You know, that's when they took them on their journey. You know, so whilst we look at it as an age system, it also, and not knowing specifically, but you can look and read between the lines, is that it was also a very delicate process to do with how hormonal people were at certain ages as well, which then took them away from country to give them a responsibility to come back to country and to be not only seen as different, but the responsibilities to act differently as well. I think we're missing a lot of that, you know, as particularly the eastern and southern states, and even inland eastern states and countries. We're missing a great deal of that, which I know for me personally, and I ain't afraid to say it, that whilst I knew I was Aboriginal, I looked at myself and I was too black to be white and too white to be black. I didn't fit in either world because I didn't know my language. I didn't know the storyline of who I was or where I was from. So it's taken me decades to learn that. And whilst I'm entrenched in that now, it's where I've got my biggest strength from. So I was lucky enough to be signed to an NRL scholarship contract at 13. So my life was then about a pathway of sport. I'll be honest, and learning about those political movements and how strong and how staunch, you know, a lot of the families are from Cowra, you know, I do my best to support that now because of, you know, the profile that I can attract as, you know, as a sportsman for a number of years, but again, someone with a bit of voice and a bit of clout in different areas. So I lean into supporting that, not trying to take over it, because I know that I didn't walk that path. It is the many decades in front of me and the many generations from that area that I have huge respect for. You know, Auntie Jenny Munros and the likes. You know, I want to sit and learn from those. You know, and then the younger generations of them, it is my I guess my responsibility or my role to support that rather than trying to lead that, because they've walked that path for many generations. It's up for me to support that.
How old were you when you went, I'm going to play this footy, but how old were you when you actually decided that you wanted to be a first grade player?
I think it was ingrained into me, if I'm honest, because like my dad playing in the Winfield Cup, and then my older brother, who was 1,000 times better player than I ever was, and that didn't get the opportunities that I was given because, you know, different injuries and so forth. He broke his neck at the age of 18, so didn't want to go on to, you know, higher sport, where I did, you know. So it was all about the drive that was, I guess, ingrained into me as a young person. And, you know, whilst we look at, you know, different values that we learn in life, sport has taught me a hell of a lot of life values and life lessons about, you know, the disciplines of being on time and the disciplines of what to eat and what not to eat. And, you know, those little things that we probably take for granted as sports people. But my life's been, you know, whilst I thought it was about sport, and from a young age, as I said, from the age of 13, I signed my first scholarship contract when the great man, rest his soul, Arthur Beetson, came down and signed me as a young fella living then in Wagga when we moved away from Cowra to Wagga. That's when I guess the trajectory of who I wanted to be changed a little bit to becoming a first grade footballer.
And you actually went to Randwick to study and play with the junior Souths and
it was junior Roosters at that point.
junior Roosters
because
the side so early.
I know, right? I can't believe I said that publicly. I'll cop all sorts of hate mail now from the staunch Rabbitoh fans, but it's a funny story that it was. I think it was about 18 months ago when the Rabbits were playing the Roosters in a semi-final, and I, as the crosstown rivalry does, give a bit of stick to the latte drinkers across at Bondi, and it was Arthur Beetson's son actually who sent a comment on the social medias to and he said, don't you forget who got you down and gave you the opportunities first. You're always a rooster before you're a rabbit, which is a bit of tongue in cheek, but I'm super thankful for the opportunities given by the great Arthur Beetson to instill some different ethics in my life to become the person I am now. When Arthur passed away.
Sorry.
When Arthur passed away, Rhoda, it hit my dad in a different way, because my dad had his challenges with different substances and things like that, and it was during the time that Arthur actually signed my dad. Firstly, and then Arthur took my dad down from Cowra to play with the Roosters, and my dad's a bit of a staunch dude and doesn't like to shed a tear, but he did in that time, and he said people don't understand how much that man changed our lives, Joe. Not my life. Don't understand how much that man changed our lives. He said, because whilst dad liked to drink and a party and that sort of thing, and at the time, Arthur took him down to Sydney and believed in him. Believed in him at a time when no one believed in him. And which then he went on to play in the Winfield Cup and played for a number of years in the Winfield Cup, which then, produced me as an offspring, which then gave me the inheritance of some, I guess, athletic ability, but also some values and morals around work ethic when it comes to sport. So I think people underestimate just how much that man changed the trajectory of our lives.
Oh, and absolutely. And I think right across, particularly the rugby league, he was an Aboriginal man playing for what was considered as one of the more elite football clubs and making a stride where I think he was at the time one of the few signed and was loved by the league family, not just by Aboriginal supporters and other players.
I was at the Roosters first, and then I went across to the Rabbitohs, and then out to Penrith and the Bulldogs. So it was my dad that played at St George, but a lot of people get that mixed up. I was lucky enough to win against St George in an under-20s grand final, but you're right, playing against on what. Then when, again, I relatively not backing away from the fact that I always knew that I was an Aboriginal person, but not knowing the different nations of who we were back then. We're talking about, early 2000s to the late 2000s, where it wasn't as widely spoken about as it is now. So when we talk about different Aboriginal people who are spiritual people crossing different lands and boundaries into different nations, it's going to have a spiritual effect on who we are and how we perform and the abilities of who we are as people, right? So you raise a really good point there. I think Aboriginal people, and I don't think by any means the NRL as a body or as an entity understand just spiritually how much or how deeply that is affecting different Aboriginal players in the game.
Absolutely. It's interesting. Your dad, had a great career. You're very influenced by his playing, and of course, having people like Artie Beetson in your world. You've got boys. I, as a mother, worry about the injuries and the long-term injuries that'll come back to haunt them when they're 80-year-old men. What do you say to your boys? Do you encourage the league with them, or from your experiences, or would you rather them be lawyers?
You don't have to wait till you're 80-year-old to have the injuries. I'm walking around with those at 37 now. It hurts me to get out of bed of a morning. But, it's a brutal game, rugby league. It's a brutal game. And with the more research and science now that is done around head trauma, rather than just the physical injuries that we see with what we see with our limbs and our body, the head trauma and the damage that it can do for our mental health, which obviously then impacts our well-being. The research is getting deeper and deeper. I've been speaking about this topic for a number of years now, and whilst I'm living the effects of head trauma and concussions, and
you went on to do boxing.
Exactly. So people say, yeah, but Joe, you chose to do that, and you know what? I'd choose to do it again every single day of the week. I'm not interested whether it's a thing or it's not a thing. I'm interested in how we heal the brain, to get it back to, and the work that I've been doing around, building new neural pathways in the brain and the neuroplasticity that helps to not only build on my memory, but also reroute or navigate our ways through trauma as First Nation people as well. So, work with the brain neurally and what it does and how it does it has massive impacts, not only physically for your brain and your memory, but also spiritually as First Nation people as far as healing trauma goes.
But you talked about the brutality of the game. And I think there's also, for very many of our young men and women who get signed, leave small country towns or large families, come to the city, there's an expectation and there's a brutality of the football culture as well. As a young player, how much did that determine your life and particularly your social life at the time when you were playing at that level?
I think it's a very false arena, if I'm honest. Like, whilst the game is very real, the lies that are told within the game, within the promises that deliver a lot of the times not a great deal, from, we're talking rugby league clubs to player managers to sponsors to all of this sort of stuff. It creates a real false hope with people. And then, we've got this ideology of who we want to be as far as being a star sports person. But when we don't get there, we come shuddering back to earth. So that has massive implications on top of the physical implications of the work that, that's happening to our brain. So it's, for me, there was some addiction issues right throughout the heights of my rugby league career. And I think the addiction issues were heightened as well because of, the finance that was readily available, because, you're playing at a top level when it comes to sport, you get paid a lot of money to doing it. So it's a challenge. And I think whilst, what we need to do more as a community, and this doesn't have to be about rugby league or doesn't have to be about elite sport, but what we need to do as a community of people, let's start to educate each other and our own first around generational wealth and how we do that to build that within our families to have secure upbringings for our lives. Now, for me, I'm the first to put my hand up to say, for 10 years I was in the NRL system and I come out of it bankrupt, because I wasn't taught how to readily deal with finance and things like that. So and again, you look at young Aboriginal boys, men, and the Aboriginal community. We don't value money a great deal. It's because
That's a different premise.
It's different for us. We've never needed it, and we probably won't need it. But when it comes to educating our young people, I think that we can go a great deal further in how we do that. And if my young boy, he's got his dreams to be an AFL player, not a rugby league player. And if I'm honest, I'm super excited with the NRLW now with the young girls, because I've got 2 girls as well. And if I'm honest, the oldest girl I've got is tougher than all the boys, so she's a big chance in doing whatever she wants to do in the sporting field too. So, but I talk to them about like, if you're going to get money, whether it be for working or anything like let's try and look after it a bit better, and let's teach each other and our communities about what we were never taught. So there's education out there to do that, and it's again, it's a challenging space for a lot of us, because we don't know it. We've never been introduced to it. We've never been born into it.
Yeah, and I think over the last couple of decades, we've seen the AFL and the NRL introduce programs that can assist in this sort of capacity building, after playing on the field ends. I saw many people extremely moved and hurt by what happened within the AFL and the clubs, and the systemic behaviour that we saw in the rise of Adam Goodes actually resigning and leaving the sport that he dreamt and loved so much. Are the codes similar, or do we see a different behaviour in the league?
Rhoda, I'll make one really important thing, is that whilst everything was happening with Adam, and there's been different issues around racism when it comes to sport, many journalists ask me, is there a race problem within the NRL? Do you think there's a race problem within the AFL? I think there's a race problem within Australia. It's just that sport is a byproduct of what the country is, So, and when it comes down to being competitive and the challenges of winning and losing, and one player being better than the other player, and if to get any slight advantage over another player, if I degrade him because of his color or his race, then maybe I'm a chance in winning. Like it's super sad, but it's a reflection of the country we live. And we have a hell of a long way to go. Are we getting better? I think so. Do I have hope? Yes, I do. Because a stackload of people learnt a hell of a lot out of the Adam Goodes saga.
When you were playing footy and you had all that money, would you travel overseas, or would you travel back to home, or what sort of travel did you do at that period?
Yeah, I always went home. Because, again, like, as we know, as blackfellas, like, it's not that we get homesick. It's probably that our spirit yearns to go home. So any chance I got, I played in the NRL system for about 10 years, and it took me all of 10 years to get used to being away. And then I moved home, so it's one of those things where I genuinely believe we always get called home. I have an extreme belief that I believe that culture is the thing that's going to heal us as a nation through 2 people. We also walk in 2 worlds, so whilst I'm in Wradjuri country today, there's every chance I can be in Gadigal tomorrow by jumping on a plane and getting on the plane for 45 minutes, so it's the beauty of technology that enables us to do that. And, talking on Zoom meetings and so forth like that as well. So,
So when you travelled and you take the kids, did you go camping, or would you do a big flash stay up at a hotel?
I do my best to camp as much as I can now. The boss, she's not a camper. She doesn't like the camping a great deal, but the kids do. They love it. And again, like, I've got my 2 older kids that live in Sydney, so it's difficult for them to try and slow their head down a little bit when they come back to the country, But I remember we had a cultural celebration a couple of years ago now, and it was the first time my 2 oldest kids camped on country, and they had the open swags and, you know, looking up, and they're like, Dad, I've never seen this many stars in my life. I was like, well, that's what happens when you're out in the bush. You know, you don't see that a great deal when you're down in the city. So it's a learning, Rhoda. I believe it's a learning, especially for young people that are tied up in the city. The bright lights can get us sometimes, and it definitely did for me for a number of years. But I'm quite happy when my feet and my shoes off, planted deeply within the soil back in Wradjuri or Wogalu country.
So what would you say on your country is the best spot to go?
So I'm someone who when I'm camping, I don't like it to be hot a great deal. So when we look at, you know, Tumut or Brungle or you know, the base of those snowy mountains, the area, I think it's a beautiful place for camping, because when I'm camping, I like to be rugged up in blankets and around a fire and things like that. So that cool air, you know, is what attracts me to camping on country. That's for sure. You know, but I've done a stack load of camping out west as well, where, you know, it's very dry and it's very hot, and but again, it's the different areas where you are has a different feel to the country where you are as well. So it's important to tread lightly and to be extremely respectful in everywhere you go.
And I can only imagine how in the old days people would have crossed across the ridges and gone down to the water sources. So extraordinary country.
We look at my people at Wogalu as well, is that we used to trade with the mob around the, you know, the Wollongong and South Coast areas. So, you know, that song line or trade route throughout there as well, is that's why there's a stack load of our family down that way as well. And this is, again, something that I'm relearning. You know, it's always, I get people come up to you, you're saying, you know, your cousin lives down that way, you got to make sure you go and introduce yourself to them. And because, again, like, what a lot of people don't realize, and especially non-Indigenous people, is that the realize of the distances that our families are, you know, geographically, is because our families used to walk for, you know, thousands of miles. You know, when it come to, you know, traveling country for sharing, and you know, when I talk about sharing, we talk about, you know, foods and items and tools, and sharing song, dance, and ceremony. You know, it's an important thing that we're very respectful wherever we go, because our old people, you know, walked those paths many thousands of years before us.
And I think you're right. We gathered an awful lot, and it doesn't matter where you go across the country, people will talk about the major festivals that used to occur, you know, where there was food in abundance, whether it was the bogan moth or the bunya nut, and people would come together, marriages were made, etc., etc. And you have actually, after football, in fact, festivals, writers' festivals have become part of your world, where you're moving around the country, because you actually decided to write a book about what happened during your progression through the sport and then on the other side. And I think it was warts and all, and it was a very incredibly brave and very honest. It was actually quite serious truth-telling in a way, where you reflected on your inner soul and talked about some of the uncomfortable truths. So going around those festivals, and I can imagine there's different audiences and different, how was that for you to have this book published, but you're literally bearing your soul at every writers' festival you go to?
It's a vulnerable space, isn't it? You know, like it's, and you know, whilst it's vulnerable, and we're talking about vulnerable topics, it's important to protect your spirit where you go, you know, because of the vulnerability associated with it as well. But I've also got to say that, you know, whilst people say it's extremely brave to talk about what I do and how I do it, I challenge that a little bit, and I say, maybe we've got to reframe the way we look at it. You know, it's, whilst people say it's brave, it's also the right thing. You know, it's the right thing to do, you know, when to talk about these sort of things in a safe space, in a safe way. And I first started talking about this sort of stuff back in 2014, talking about, as you said, warts and all, the mental health challenges that I've gone through and experienced my entire life, the suicidal ideation since I was a very young age, the suicide attempt, the addiction issues that I went through, because it's very real stuff.
Where was the turning point where you went, I mean, I can't even imagine, and I know we see statistics rise every week, particularly in the situation the world is in at the moment, we're seeing younger and younger of our people taking their lives. Where was that for you? What was the catalyst that said, I have to do something?
I think it progressed. It progressed to a point where, I first, and I talk a lot about this, where my journey very first started on the back of, and I'm super thankful that it did, on the back of a lady who came to me and decided to do a short film. And that short film wasn't initially going to be about the depths of what I went to. I guess it probably progressed that little way because she was the line of work that she was involved in. She would hear a lot of depression issues within the. She worked at a cafe, or she owned a cafe at the time, a coffee shop. So, whilst speaking about that and speaking candidly about it, and it was beautifully done, and it was scripted beautifully and all that. I think what it did for a lot of people was planted a seed within them that it's okay to speak about this sort of stuff, and I'd just come back from playing in the NRL, and then I was a professional boxer at the time from a relatively big rural community as far as Wagga goes. And it was at a time where no one spoke about it. No one spoke openly and candidly about mental health, mental illness, and suicide. So it was a time where, I'd come out and I'd spoken about it, and it attracted a stack load of attention from the media and from the community because it was so, I guess, people thought that, well, there's no way in the world Joe Williams could have mental health challenges because he's this, as far as, he's got this lifetime as sport, and he's always smiling and everything's great, but which people don't realize that that's the facade that a lot of us carry,
Well, we see that as success. Little do we know that you're going to write a book called The Enemy Within.
Yeah, it was, and that's exactly what I call it. No matter how many people I played against on the rugby league field or what I did in the boxing ring, nothing ever compared to the enemy I fought inside my own head that I have done for a number of years since I was a young kid. So it spoke openly and candidly about it, but it also, this book wasn't just about my challenges. This book was about how I got out of those tough times. That's the most important thing out of the book. It talks about, whilst I was contemplating my life on a daily basis for many, many, many years, I also had some tools in my kit bag that kept me here, that also not only kept me here, but enabled me to be a successful sports person and a successful person within community. So people were wondering, what was it that you did to keep that, quiet? And the book's called Defying the Enemy Within. So whilst it's about the dark stuff, it's mostly about how I have defied the enemy within for a number of years, and how I continue to do that, and writing about this and journaling about this, and and even studying about this, where I'll undertake some a pretty big some study next year, which is hugely exciting, which is just about
study.
I'm doing a PhD.
Wow.
Yeah. So from a kid who didn't pass a single subject at school, to writing my own book from front to back with spell check, of course, and the help of an editor and some commas in the right spaces. I guess I've written my own autobiography. I'm now known as adjunct associate professor of the University of Queensland. and it's probably, you know, and I'm going to be doing a PhD next year. So like starting a PhD.
Put on.
Pardon?
What's the PhD you're doing? Like what?
It's going to be about again, whilst we look at the horrific statistics around suicides in our communities, if we had over 2,500 different dialects of language across our country, and there was no meaning for suicide in it, it tells you that what we did kept us well and alive. If we've gone from 0 suicides in our communities, and again, we can assume that it's 0 suicides because there's no story. Everything in Aboriginal culture, there's a story for, as you know. There's no story for suicide. If there's nothing that means it in over 2,500 different dialects of language, it tells you it wasn't there. If we've gone from a community that had 0 suicides to now the highest rates of suicide in the world, what we're doing now is not working. So what I'm looking at is going to be delving into, you know, what our old people did to keep us well. You know, and I can't let too much out of the bag, but it's going to be an exciting project. I'm really looking forward to it.
Oh, Joe, I've really looked forward to talking with you. It's just been wonderful. We're almost out of time. And I think ending on that, there's great hope and optimism, but indeed, it's something that we do need to investigate. It's always interesting when our listeners and our visitors to our site who do book an Aboriginal experience across this country, they'll soon learn the many words that didn't exist, like thank you, because of the different cultural nuances we had, how we invited in people. And I just want to say thank you for inviting us into your Zoom COVID safe lounge room. And we learnt a lot, and it's just been wonderful. And we look forward to hearing from you further down the track when we bring some more stories to our website. Thank you, Joe.
I think, Rhoda, there's a real thirst across our country with non-Indigenous people that want to listen and want to learn now. You know, in some great friends of mine who are non-Indigenous people who I butted heads with over many, many years around different belief systems, are starting to now sit down and go, hey, Joe, tell me that story about that. You know, how come? And people don't realize that all of our dreaming stories are all deeply embedded with values to look after each other and to take care of each other. You know, we had the first corroboree here in Wagga in 150 years, and 90% of the people were non-Indigenous that came to watch and listen and learn. And the mayor said to me, Joe, this is beautiful. Thanks for bringing it to the community. And I was like, this is a seat at our table. You know, it's time you sit with us now. You know, the street's been one way for 230 odd years. It's time to, you know, and if we had different systems in place that looked after each other and you know, we're probably struggling to walk between the two worlds now. So it's about not only our mob relearning, it's about also sharing that. You know, our greatest responsibility is as First Nation people, if we've got the knowledges to help people, we've got to share those.
And on that, we will end. And I hope you can join us for more of our shared histories and stories. Many of us are biracial, but we come with some unique perspectives of country. Thanks again, Joe Williams, and thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Rhoda. Always a pleasure.
Welcome to Country acknowledges our First Peoples, the custodians who continue their stewardship across our vast lands. We invite you to be our guests and make a true connection. Welcome to Country is a non-profit organisation. It's at the helm of an Aboriginal man and it's run by Aboriginal staff.
All Australians should be passionate about our own country, and Aboriginal culture is a key part of that.
We are the original storytellers, and if everyone understands that message, I think that we'll have a far better future for all of Australia.
It's about learning and connecting.
As we know, it's the oldest living culture in the world.
Simply is the premier site to find amazing experiences and great products around Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Australia.
Got to have a great website. So what was needed was to have a common platform that could do the marketing, the sales, all those things that small businesses, whether they're Indigenous or not, struggle over. So people can focus on the thing they're passionate about and deliver that business.
It's about creating employment and economic opportunities for the community. That's the number one thing.
The best thing is by purchasing from us, they are directly giving back and supporting Indigenous communities, artists and their families.
The key is to enable them to stay on their country or in their city and be able to give them a platform to really flourish and create self-sufficiency.
It is basically self-determination and learning about country through the narrative of our lens.
We're not doing this because we want to put money into our pockets, but rather we want to see community benefit from what we're doing.
We want to be able to show that we're in control and managing our stories. We want to be able to share those stories, and we want to be able to create our own jobs and create our own economies.
For me and my wife's business, we've got the daughters all working. When we started, we had the brothers involved, had the aunties involved, had the uncles involved. Yeah, so we show them what Paraka look like, and get them to throw a spear also as well.
We're rich in culture and history, and I said we need to share that because that's where we're going to get changes.
It's a great initiative, you know, really connecting with Indigenous tourism, grassroots people, teaching culture and educating people.
This is a form of livelihood, it's independence, it's self-esteem, and it brings pride.
Now that I'm here working for Dreamtime for the last 2 years, I've actually became a master reef guide.
You know, some of us are really reaping the benefits of that in terms of employment, you know, self-empowerment, you know, self-sustainability, economic development in our communities.
It is really time that this country started to embrace the importance, the knowledge, the power and the beauty of Aboriginal culture.
I have always wanted for non-Indigenous people in this country to actually experience, meet and connect with Aboriginal people.
When you visit a destination, you hear that local story, you feel the seasons, you witness the passion that people have on the land that has been there since time immemorial. There's nothing quite like it.
Anytime any Australian's looking for an Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander cultural experience, the first thing they'll think of is welcometocountry.com.
To continue your journey and make a true connection right across Australia, visit us at welcometocountry.com.